Welcome to Nebraska Farm Bureau's Inside Profitability series. My name is Jay Rempe. I'm Senior Economist for Nebraska Farm Bureau, and I'm your host for today's event. For those of you that haven't participated or are not aware of our Inside Profitability series, a little background: it is a series of webinars, podcasts, and social media events that focus on farm and ranch profitability. And our goal is to provide information to farmers and ranchers to help them manage their farm and ranch. And what we think makes these unique is we try to focus on topics that our members identify as ones that they're thinking about out there every day when they're working on their farm and ranch. So if you have a topic or an idea or a thought or something that's been running through your mind that you'd like us to focus on for one of these webinars, please let us know. My email address is jayr@nefb.org, and shoot me an email with your idea, and we'll certainly take a look at it and see if we can wrap a story or a webinar around that. But again, our underlying goal of these is to provide you the information and some materials of value to help you manage your farm and ranch. Today is a third webinar in a series focusing on drought. Drought is certainly on the minds of a lot of producers in the state of Nebraska. The latest drought monitor shows that 94% of the state is still under some form of drought. 45% of the state is still under either severe, extreme, or exceptional drought. And just earlier this week, the USDA released its latest crop progress report that showed that 43% of the state was either under their subsoil moisture was either short or very short. So drought is very much prevalent out there. One of the issues that comes up during drought is crop and livestock insurance issues and some of the questions around that, and it gets a little more complex. So today we're going to focus on that. We're going to focus on things that producers need to know related to crop and some livestock coverages. And with us to do that is Zach Hyland. Zach is the Regional Crop Manager for Farm Bureau Financial Services. This is a repeat performance for Zach. He was one of our first presenters last year when we started this series on livestock risk protection insurance. So Zach, we're very glad to have you back. Thank you for joining us again, and I'll turn it over to you and let you talk a little bit about some of the issues around crop insurance.
All right, well, thank you, Jay. You really hit the nail on the head there with the concerns that folks are having across the state of Nebraska and a lot of parts west of there. We've been exceptionally dry, and really when you are dry, that's one of the situations that crop insurance is there for, to provide support when you have yield losses due to lack of precipitation. So we're going to get into some of the items that farmers and ranchers should consider if they are experiencing drought. And we'll go ahead and kick this off with just asking the question, the simple question: my crops are damaged by drought. What do I do? And really, from the crop insurance perspective on that, the first and best thing you can do is continue to care for and maintain that crop, in addition to turning in the claim as soon as possible. In order for a crop insurance claim to be paid, good farming practices have to be maintained through the growing season, regardless of the adverse conditions that are out there. You may wonder, what are good farming practices? That's a pretty general term I'm using. And the way RMA defines good farming practices is as the cropping practices that are generally recognized for the area by agronomic experts. So our agronomic experts can be folks such as the county extension office, other agronomic advisors that you use individually. So really just follow the advice that's out there, and you'll be able to meet that criteria. So once you've maintained your good farming practices and you've turned in a claim, that's really when we start to get into what the options are that are available to you. So with your loss adjuster or with your agent, you're going to have to make some decisions on what you want to do with that drought damaged crop. Some folks are going to experience a bushel loss, maybe major, maybe minor, but they're still going to take that crop to harvest. In that scenario, it's pretty clear cut how crop insurance is going to work. If you have a bushel loss, we're going to take that by the harvest price. figure out what that revenue loss is in that scenario. Other times, folks elect to take a crop that's insured as a grain and chop it for silage. This is allowable, but you cannot do so unless you've turned in a claim to the adjuster. The adjuster's gone out and appraised that crop and released that crop to be chopped for silage. And then finally, the last option, if we get into the worst case scenario, that crop hasn't even produced enough to have the option to send it to silage. That crop can be destroyed, but again, you have to have approved insurance provider permission and loss adjuster approval before you go ahead and destroy that crop. So finally, if you do choose the silage or destroying option, the adjuster will conduct appraisals for the crop for both your production history and claim payment purposes. We'll get into some of the scenarios that happen with appraisals here on an upcoming slide. All right, so if you've insured the corn for grain, but you are going to chop it for silage, as I mentioned before, this is allowed. It's your crop. You're the one who is responsible for making the agronomic decisions of what makes the most sense for you. That said, we've got to follow the correct procedures and processes to get that permission to do so from your insurance company. So if any portion of the crop is not going to be harvested or put to another use, then it must be appraised as soon as possible. So we need to get that claim turned in to your agent. An adjuster will get in contact with you in short order after that and come out and figure out what that crop potentially could have produced had it continued through the entire growing season. In the scenario where accurate appraisals can't be made, maybe the corn hasn't reached a stage where an appraisal can be accurate, the AIP may ask the farmer to defer the appraisal until the accurate appraisals can be made. So they may ask you to wait a week, they may ask you to wait a couple of months, but in those scenarios, oftentimes, they'll ask for representative sample areas to be left in the field. So if you're going to cut that crop for silage, they may ask you to leave some strips throughout the field in order to have some areas that they can make accurate determinations based off of. Finally, if you get an appraisal, the AIP goes out and does your appraisal for you, and you disagree with how those numbers came out, you can elect to leave representative sample areas by telling the adjuster, hey, I disagree with your assessment of this. I'm going to leave these strips throughout the field, and then we're going to see what the bushels actually are on a more full growing season. Those representative sample areas do have to be cared for, maintained, all that, with the exception of irrigating. So if you're operating on irrigated ground and you leave representative sample areas, you don't have to continue to water those strips, but you do need to maintain them until the final appraisal can be done, should you disagree. So, as we're talking about irrigation water and many of our irrigated crops in the state of Nebraska, the question comes up about diverting irrigation water. So under certain scenarios, high winds, extreme temperatures, etc., lack of rainfall like we've had recently, folks may elect to divert some water from one pivot to another, or from one portion of the field to another, if part of that crop is simply too far gone for it to make sense to continue to irrigate. This is allowable throughout the policy, but the thing you should consider if you have an inclination, this might be something you need to do for your crop, you need to contact the insurance provider, turn in a claim, and be in contact with your loss adjuster, so that way they can consult with you on the appropriateness of diverting that water to other portions of your farm or portions of that field. So moving past the 2022 crop year and into 2023, if the drought persists and this fall during wheat planting season, there's an expectation that there's not enough water in order to properly grow that crop, whether it's from irrigated ground or just precipitation from the sky. Prevented planting coverage is available against drought conditions. One thing that should be noted here is, since this drought has already begun, as Jay mentioned at the beginning with some of those statistics, you can't add additional prevented planting coverage to your fall crops. So what that means, there is some buy up prevented planting options that get you 5% more on a prevented planting scenario. That can't be added unless it's already on the policy. But the standard built into the policy prevented planting coverage is available should the drought continue through the fall. Prevented planting scenarios are very complicated. So again, if you think you're potentially not going to be able to get fall crops in, consult with your agent. They're going to be able to let you know what your prevented planting eligibility is. The agent can then consult with other loss adjusters and loss managers in the area to run by any hypothetical scenarios that you may or may not have. And finally, moving into 2023, I would really recommend to any farmers or ranchers out there who have hay or grazing ground to consider pasture range and forage coverage. So PRF, as we call it in the industry, covers a deviation below the average rainfall on a 17 by 17 mile grid. This policy has been used extensively through states west of Nebraska, but it hasn't caught on in Nebraska quite the way it has in some other states that traditionally are a little bit drier. I think PRF is a great way to protect farmers and ranchers against the potential feed costs that they may have if they're unable to produce their own hay or grazing ground. It's a coverage that works in 2-month intervals. So you're going to pick your multiple 2-month intervals throughout the 2023 year by December 1st of 2022. If in those 2-month intervals, the rainfall is less than what the historical average is, you can receive a payment to offset some of those increased feed costs that you may be incurring. And we do sell quite a bit of livestock risk protection throughout the state of Nebraska. So I think it's important to mention here that in, I believe it was April, RMA released a bulletin that expanded some of the marketing periods for LRP policies, for livestock risk protection policies. Previously, it's a 60-day window on the front side of your end date on your policy and the back side of the end date on the policy. Due to the drought conditions and lack of grass out there, RMA's opened this wide up. So folks who have current LRP endorsements can sell their animals at any time and still be eligible to receive claim payment on those, whether or not it's within the 60-day window that they previously agreed to through the policy. So our takeaways here, just to kind of wrap up everything I've mentioned already. So if you are experiencing drought damaged crops, you need to continue to care for that crop and turn in a claim as soon as possible. By turning in the claim, that's going to give you the optionality of taking that crop from something you were going to harvest as grain and harvesting it as silage or destroying it, or whatever the case may be for what you determine you need to do with that crop. If you are diverting any irrigation water, that is allowable, but please file a claim before you do so. Consult with your loss adjuster and they will guide you in the right direction to make sure that that diversion is not going to have any negative impacts on your policy. If this drought continues to persist, and fingers crossed we start getting some good moisture here soon, prevented planting coverage can be available for fall crops such as wheat, but you can't buy up your prevented planting coverage when drought conditions already exist. If you are a farmer or rancher with haying or grazing ground, talk to your agent about PRF coverage for 2023. I think that's a huge opportunity in the state to protect our farmers and ranchers against those rising feed costs for hay that they may be experiencing already. And then finally, if you're an LRP customer, you do have a lot of extra flexibility in your marketing windows. So don't hang on to calves longer than you want to, simply because of the LRP policy. RMA has recognized the issues that are out there, and they've opened up those marketing windows. So with that, I will open it up. Any questions for me, Jay?
Yeah, thank you very much, Zach. I appreciate the information and the good stuff there. I was just curious, just one that just popped to mind about when you're talking about the LRP and don't holding on to the calves. Is that something that is limited to areas that they have to be declared drought or disaster areas or anything, or is that just something that you can go in and show that you've had some drought issues and that you're able to take advantage of that flexibility?
So that is a blanket flexibility provided across the country. It's not just for folks who are stricken by drought. It's not for specific counties or states. They open the whole thing up because, I think when you look at the maps out there, this drought's affecting a lot more folks than just county by county. And also, to your question again, you don't have to prove that you were stricken by drought in order to market those animals early. It's, like I said, it's a blanket waiver.
Okay. And it sounds just a common theme in a lot of your comments, Zach, is communication with your insurance provider. Just make sure that you're communicating before you make any decisions and know what your options are. I was just curious on if I'm a producer and I'm thinking about silage or using that option, what's the timing involved in terms of contacting my insurance provider, getting an adjuster out there to be able to look at that and then move on? I'm assuming you can't expect to like today talk to your adjuster or your agent and then tomorrow go out and cut it for silage.
Yeah, you'd be accurate with that. There's no specific guidelines on that. I think our folks at our approved insurance providers, they would probably ask that if you're thinking about shopping for silage, let's get that claim turned in 2 weeks before you intend to chop it. If you forget and it's only a week, communicate that to the company. In my experience, they're very good about accommodating special circumstances. But if we've got a lot of these appraisals that we need to conduct, just having more time so that way our adjusters can formulate a plan for how they're going to get out and see all these people is greatly appreciated.
Okay. And along those lines, then, if I'm trying to make that decision whether to take the crop to harvest or to put it in silage or other options, is that something I could reach out to the adjuster or the insurance provider and say, hey, could you come out and take a look and give me some advice on what you see here?
Yeah. So, our loss adjusters wear a lot of hats oftentimes, and I think our farmers have formed great relationships with the loss adjusters out there, but really that's not the role that they play. Our farmers are fortunate to have, whether it's county extension or other agronomists that they use for advice in those scenarios. And that would be my primary resource when I'm trying to decide what to do with my crop when it's drought damaged. With that said, if you've got a hypothetical scenario and the loss adjusters out there on the farm, they can let you know how that would pay out from a crop insurance standpoint, or how it would work out from a crop insurance standpoint. But our loss adjusters aren't there to provide agronomic advice.
Okay. All right. Appreciate that. And then a follow-up question on the water issue. And I know this has come up from time to time in the Republican Basin in Nebraska and the southwest corner and some other parts of the state that have some more surface water irrigation. But if it's a matter of not simply trying to divert the water, I'm just not going to be able to get my normal water deliveries. How does that play into this?
Yeah. Yep. So if, going into the 2022 crop year, I think we all had that expectation that there'd be enough water to irrigate our crops. That's changed. This drought is continuing. We didn't get the rainfall this spring that we thought we would. That is a covered cause of loss on your multi-peril policy. So from a crop insurance perspective, it's just treated as a bushel loss. And there's really not a concern in that. When we talk about diverting irrigation water, I take that more as I've got 160 acres on a pivot, and 80 of those acres are so far gone that it doesn't make sense to irrigate them anymore. I'm going to take the water that I had for that 160 acres and now just put it on the 80 that's still good. So those things are allowable, but again, consult with the loss adjuster, give them a heads up before you do anything like that, because it is required within the policy.
Right. Okay. And this really isn't related to drought at all, Zach, but just a question that came to mind as I was thinking about our webinar today. Recently, the Biden administration announced some changes to make it easier to allow double cropping. Does that play into this at all, or any thoughts at all that you might have on double cropping and that action and what it might mean for Nebraska?
Yeah, so there's a lot of buzz about that recently. I saw the news articles and got some notifications there too, but it wasn't really anything new. It was really just more, in my opinion, kind of a call to action about some existing procedures that were out there for crop insurance and double cropping. And really what that call to action is for folks who are planting soybeans after wheat. I think RMA is trying to gather more data on where those double cropping areas are, and the practices that they're following. So whether that's relay cropping of planting soybeans into an existing wheat stand, or our traditional double cropping of harvesting the wheat and following it up with some beans afterwards. What they're notifying people about is you do have the option to ensure you're following another crop soybeans, even if you're not in a county that has an existing insurance offer for it. You can do so through what's called a written agreement. It's some paperwork you fill out with your crop insurance agent, requesting coverage on a practice that wasn't previously insurable. And I think big picture, the intention on this is to find out what counties have a lot of double cropping, and to figure out which processes they're following in terms of relaying or traditional double cropping. So that way they can make an insurance offer in future years, and we can skip the written agreement process.
Okay. Well, thanks, Zach. I appreciate the information on that, because you're right. It was something that's quite of a buzz around it, and we had a few questions about that. So thought I'd throw that in there. So, well, I think that's all the time we have for today, Zach. I really, again, appreciate you joining us. For those that are watching this, again, this was part of a 3-part series of dealing with drought. The first one dealt with grain marketing during a drought. The second one about water management, irrigation, water management, and better ways and more effective ways to manage your irrigation during drought. And if you're interested in those webinars or any other webinars that we've put on in this series, please go to www.nefb.org, and you should be able to find all that you want. So thanks again, Zach. Appreciate you joining us, and that will end our presentation today.